We might get underway. Thanks for coming back and welcome back to the club rooms. We got there. So we thought this night was a bit of a welcome back to the club rooms, and as it says on the screen, a bit of a focus on the Icom 9700, because we do have quite a few members who have 9700s and who have had them for quite a while, and so we would get their experiences and their learnings and some interesting experiences and learnings. So we put it together. This is a presentation that's being done by a whole bunch of people, so we'll be changing over and doing bits and pieces along the way. But to start off with, I'll hand to Rex.
I must admit, when Justin asked me to be involved in this, I thought, I actually don't know how to operate this radio. And yet I've had it longer than anybody else. And the problem with this radio is it can do anything you want to do, but how do you remember all the things that it damn well does? In fact, talking to Brian 7BW, who's had his for a few weeks now, his son, who's a computer systems person, came round to help him set it up, and he says, "This is not a radio, this is a computer." And it's just got so many menus and settings and so forth that the reality is I have focused on the things that I am interested in and I know how they work, but there are other people in this room who have focused on other things, satellites and remote control and all sorts of things. And if I try to do some of these other things, I haven't got a hope. So I'll give you an introduction and tell you about the things I know. So it's a very similar to the IC-9700, which some people might have. Those who've used the IC-9700, which I haven't, find it much easier to use because a lot of the controls are similar. The touch screen, the colour and all of these things I think have been transferred over to this radio. It's a 270 centimetre and 23 centimetre radio, and unlike all the earlier Icoms which you purchased a separate module for 23 centimetre, it comes with 23 centimetre all set up and ready to go. And that's been a bit of a boon for our 23 centimetre QSO party, because everyone who gets one is immediately able to be involved. And I can see a number of people. In fact, you get one IC-9700 and you get 2 call signs. It's all modes, so you can do FM and sideband and digital, and those who wish to can do CW and whatever. And this is the back. There's separate antenna connectors for 2 meters, 432 and 1296. There's the ability to sort of lock the radio against a 10 meg source through this SMA connector. And a few other connections. This is a USB connector, which is important if you want to do digital. So, and a big advantage for digital is just one connector to your computer. You don't have to have an interface box. It's got its own sound card all built in. And one connector does both TX and RX audio and PTT, so just one lead.
Rex,
yep.
Is that a network connection above the SMA? Yes, it is.
Yes.
Oh,
Step back.
am I going the wrong way? Okay. When you said there's a network connection...
Above the SMA. Above the SMA.
Oh, okay. Well, see, I didn't even know that.
We'll talk about that later.
So you only know what you use. Okay. This is what the advertising blurb says it will do. Again, all VA, 144, 432 and 1296, satellite, DVD, digital voice, funny D-star modes and things like that. The intuitive touchscreen display, maybe it's intuitive after you've used it for months, but I'm not sure whether that's correct. It's certainly a touchscreen display. Real-time spectrum scope and waterfall, these are really good. For instance, the spectrum scope is so good that if someone comes on the 1296 meg QSO party who's too weak to actually know they've even transmitted, you can read their signal, you can see a line on the spectrum scope. So you know when they've stopped transmitting. Independent receiver and full duplex, all important for satellite stuff. I haven't used any of this. The audio scope, yeah, it's interesting to see you transmit audio at the same time and you can share that with the spectrum. The power amplifiers, they say they're newly designed, given that the IC-910, which was its predecessor, had lots of troubles with its power amplifiers. Hopefully the newly designed power amplifiers are better. D-Star, built-in DVD gateway, I don't even know what that means. Icom's digital expertise, that must be important. And yeah, comprehensive menus for satellite operation. It's certainly got comprehensive menus for everything. So many that you can't find your way around them most of the time. Normal and reverse tracking. Oh, I'm sure that's for satellites too. AFC I haven't used. Lots of memories. I think they'd be good if I could work out how to put things into memory, but I haven't yet worked that out. Loud and clear audio. Compatible with funny things, which someone else will talk about. And a built-in server function, which I think is related to remote operation. But you can see, when you look at a list like that, it does a lot of things that you would have never dreamt of in having in a radio 20 years ago, or probably even 10 years ago. My impressions were, it's a really nice transceiver to operate, at least once you've learnt the things you want to use it for. It's really very good value for money for about 2,300.
Strictly Ham, I've updated that. Strictly Ham have it on special right at the moment for that.
Right.
So.
Okay. When you look at similar sort of radios, you were paying more than this for radios with much less capability 10 and 20 years ago in real terms.
What was the 910 worth, Rex?
Yeah, I think so. Particularly particularly if you had the 1200 meg module in it. That's right. Yeah, I bought my two 910s second hand for about 1,700, but can do almost anything you want to do. But you've got to get used to menus. In some cases, you go down 4 or 5 layers of menu to get to what you need. And if you're I find I have to write myself a set of instructions to do everything so I know which menus to work through. The frequency stability is poor. Can move more than 30 hertz or more at 2 meters when the fan comes on. But there are solutions which we'll discuss later. Now, Icom, when Icom originally brought the radio out, they had this 10 meg SMA socket. And we all thought that was going to lock it to 10 megs. But in practice, it was just like a crystal calibrator. And it allowed you to tune it to based on an accurate 10 meg source. But then afterwards, it drifted. And every time the fan came on, it drifted more and so forth. Fine for FM or maybe sideband if you're prepared to keep tuning. But for a radio that had so many other brilliant features, I think it was amazing how they stuffed up. Because for another $20, they could have locked it properly. They've made some attempts, mainly because people like me fairly savaged them in reporting on it on the web, so that they've automated the crystal calibrator function, so it tries to recalibrate itself every couple of seconds. The trouble is it can't do it perfectly accurately, and you still get some drift while it's catching up. It's only a real problem when the fan comes on, because you immediately gets hit with a frequency change in the oscillator. It tries to correct for that, and it'll be up to 15 hertz off at 2 meters when it's trying to do all that correction. To my mind, you just have to have some method of properly GPS locking it, and there's 3 methods that have developed. There's injection locking solutions by Minikits and Leo Bodler. Essentially what injection locking does, it puts a strong signal into your oscillator, overloads it, and it locks to it. But it has a limited locking range. Hayden will... Is this your time to talk about the limited locking range of the Minikits?
Yeah, do it briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the mini kits come in a completely built package. All it is just a frequency generator and a SMA to like a little board that you had to solder inside the radio, and where the oscillator can is you would pop it on top of that one solder blob, and that was it. So the modification was easy, and there was no soldering inside the radio. The only problem with it was that, as Rex said, it had a very limited locking range, and we have a few ideas of why that was the case. It's either the box that was built doesn't put up enough power to override the internal oscillator, or where he's got the coupler board that sits in the radio, it doesn't quite sit close enough to the oscillator to override it. So that was the mini kits board, and I think it was something like it had a locking range of if the radio drifted any more than about 30 hertz off a frequency, it would stop locking to it.
At 2 meters? At
2 meters, so that increased exponentially as you went up to 1296. So, yeah. And it would result in a funny warble that would happen even on sideband. So it wasn't really a good solution for what I was using it for, because the radio was located remotely. If you had it in the shack and you were able to tweak the settings constantly, it would be fine. But I think Alan's going to talk about the Leo Bodner unit later on, but allegedly that has a wider locking range.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get Alan up now.
This is the Leo Bodner injection board, and all it's got is one SMA connector, which is where the signal goes in, 49152 megahertz, and it's got a little inductor which just sits inside the can, and that's all it does. It just swamps its own oscillator with the signal that comes from the Leo Bodner frequency source, which in this case, well, it's set it for 49152. This one's programmable from 400 Hz to 810 megahertz. There is another one with 2 channels out, but yeah, it'd be good if you could get the 10 megs for the normal Icom locking and also the 49152, but you can't. There's only certain frequency combinations you can have. But that, I use that, but I still use it with the Icom frequency locking, the whatever you want to call it, the synchronization.
Yeah.
So it just keeps nudging it to keep it on frequency. I haven't gone to the extent of putting that one in. But that from Leo Bodner is €99 delivered. The double output one's €149, I think. It seems to work quite well. The GPS antenna, I've never unwound it. It just sits on the desk inside the shack, which is in the middle of the house, so it just happily works. And it seems to work when doing, what is it, QRO64D,
Right.
Rex. And I'm assuming Rex is using the, well, I know he's using the VK1XX phase locking. I seem to be within 1 hertz of him, but I haven't transmitted to see what happens if I transmit. And I get the other temperature variations. So that's that one. But my only other comments is that it works really well, but by God, it's got some menus that are hard to follow at times. So I might leave that there.
Okay, thank you, Al. Now, the solution which I have been using, I have 2, but I had access to Richard's. VK1XX made a prototype, which he calls Mark 1, and I've got that in one radio. He then improved it in a Mark 2, which I have in another radio. And then he finally made his Mark 3, which we got the first one from him about a week ago. And Richard has it in his radio. It's got the advantage that it locks over the full, because it's a full PLL and adjusts the whole voltage to the oscillator. It locks over a very wide range. We're talking sort of maybe 100 hertz or so for the Leo Bodner one, which, you know, with crystal aging and temperature changes at 2 meters, you can lose lock, but you can then retune it. But with this, I haven't measured it, but my impression is it locks over several kilohertz. Yes, so it's capable of locking over several kilohertz. So that's what I regard as the preferred solution. It does require soldering inside the radio, and given that this radio has a 5-year warranty, those who are concerned about sending the thing back on warranty might worry about doing soldering inside. I'm sure they would try and complain that you did something, but I think the reality is if you send a car back because you put an accessory on it, it doesn't void the warranty, and I think if you went to push them to the limit, I'm sure you could still get your warranty, even if you'd put one in. It's been done properly. Now, my 2 applications, my first application was, well, not my first application, but I tend to use it for FM operation on 1296 with the 1296 meg QSO party, which, and I leave it running on 1296.15, and there are quite a few people come up and use it as a little chat frequency during the day. stability without the 10 meg source is quite adequate for FM, so the radio out of the box, I think yours is out of the box and nobody's ever worried about your frequency, so for FM it's fine. It's got quite a good internal preamp, so a masthead preamp's not really required if you've got short and good quality cable. And 10 watts is adequate for the 10 watts that it produces on 1296 is adequate for operation around Hobart and
Coles Bay.
Pardon?
Coles Bay.
And Coles Bay, yes. If anyone, is interested in getting onto 1296 and getting involved in that, it's an excellent radio. And it does open up lots of other options if you want to move in different directions. My main interest has been digital and EME. Digital on 1296 up to the Launceston guys, because while you can occasionally work them on SSB, you really need digital to have reliable QSOs up to Launceston. I made the point that with the one lead you can set your computer up very simply. For EME, you can adjust the TX and RX frequencies can both be automatically adjusted in real time for what's called CFOM operation, which stands for constant frequency on the moon. So your computer basically drives the radio to compensate for the Doppler off the moon. So at 10 gigs, you might have up to 20 kilohertz Doppler, plus or minus 20 kilohertz, changing at a rate of about 1 hertz a second. And this radio can adjust in 1 hertz steps and follow all of that, which is good. Most Yaesu radios won't allow you to adjust frequency while you're transmitting, so it rules out this sort of operation. I don't know whether they had a sort of thing that if you allowed people to adjust frequency while they're transmitting, they might go out of the band or some concern like that. But essentially, if you want to do this, you've got to go to Icom. And the IC-910 allowed 1 hertz steps both transmit and receive, but there are very few radios that actually give you 1 hertz steps both transmit and receive, which it does. It takes a while to set up the radio for digital operations, but go to VK7HH's Hayden's website, who's got a nice set of instructions. I still think you need to also have a step-by-step cheat sheet alongside you while you're listening to Hayden's instructions.
Just run my video at half speed, that'll be all right.
Yes.
Let's run Hayden at half speed.
Then I don't work.
And it's on this YouTube website. Now, operation with a linear or transverter, it's good in the sense it's got a separate power limit setting. So, for instance, if you're using the radio on 2 meters to run into a 10 gig transverter, which has got a power limit of a couple of watts, and you suddenly put 100 watts out of this thing, you're in trouble. But you can set this power limit. The only trouble is if you then go back to 2 meters and want to transmit 100 watts, you've got to turn it off. And so there's still a risk that even with this power limit that you're going to blow up your transverter. So you've got to be on top of things. It's got a time delay before it actually transmits that's adjustable up to 30 milliseconds. This is important for solid state PAs in as much as solid state PAs tend to be set so that unless the output relay actually changed over so that the SWR is low into the antenna, they will trip. And people were saying, oh, this radio keeps tripping every time I turn it on. And that's just because the solid state relays were too fast and it was actually transmitting. So to my mind, you should set this for the 30 milliseconds. The first 30 milliseconds of what you say won't probably convey too much information. That solves all the problems with having to use sequences and things on your PA. 30 milliseconds is not enough for waveguide switches, as we need at 10 gigs, so you still need a sequencer at 10 gigs. There's only one PTT output, so you must manually switch PTT when changing different linears or to transverters. It's never worried me. I just have an RCA plug that I change when I change bands, but I notice a lot of people think that the radio should automatically switch to whatever linear they've got on what band. And probably for contest operation that's important, but so some people have a problem there. I know VK4 Adam, what was he? G8Z developed a system where he could pick the band out of the connector at the back and adjust the PTT for the various linears, but he lost interest in it, didn't he?
Probably blew up a few linears.
Yeah.
No, he didn't.
So that didn't proceed. I think there might be a Dutch version of something like that that's around, but I'm quite happy with RCA sockets.
You can read the CIV voltage.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do some stuff with an Arduino, which is what Adam did. He had a really nice GUI and touch screen.
Yes. Okay. Next is Richard.
Okay, so this was hurriedly put together the other night when I actually used software to drive the radio to place satellites. I find it's really difficult to do manually because it's, as Rex mentioned, the touch screen and just the whole mechanism driving it is quite difficult to do sometimes. My old 736 was really quite intuitive. You could just receive on one frequency and just swap the bizzo over to transmit and just basically send a carrier and tune it till you're locked on, then flick it over to either normal or reverse, and it would quite happily track. So but I came across a bit of software, SAT PC32, and managed to make it all work. So if you want to play satellites, you can sort of do a few things. You can sort of do what we were doing when we've had a bit of a play out here at the club before with like an arrow antenna and some bits and pieces. But I think if you want to have more reliable stuff, and look, I've seen some guys on YouTube. I've never been able to achieve those results with a handheld antenna, so maybe it's just me, but I think if you have some directional antennas for 270 and even for 1296 for L band, some satellite prediction software, you can use your phone or something on a PC, a notepad for writing down contacts who you talk to, and a bit of patience and enthusiasm, because I guarantee you the first few times you try it, it won't work. So you need to sort of persist, because otherwise it's very easy to lose a bit of enthusiasm. You listen on the satellite, you hear lots and lots and lots of 1 2 1 2 1 2, and that's quite often on a pass that's all you hear. So I've tried two pieces of satellite tracking software. One is free and one is certainly not free. G-Predict is the one at the bottom. That's a cross-platform thing. It works on Linux or Windows. And it's really quite cool. It's free and it's got some really cool features. I had it working with my Icom 9100 to do the Doppler, and it worked quite well, but I could not get it to work with a 9700. But I believe there's been a new version released that it just messed up. It reversed the transmit and receive VFOs, so everything was sort of upside down. But after being a bit disheartened with that, I came across SAT PC32, which is free to try. The only limitation with the free one is that every time you fire it up, you need to put in your lat long and altitude every time, which is a little bit of a encouragement to pay to get it registered. So I persisted for quite some time to convince myself that it was good. It's got a bit of a steep learning curve. It does things a little bit differently, but once you get the hang of it, it's really pretty damn flash. So I paid that. I think it was $50 US to register it, and it'll do everything, and it's really quite capable. So it controls the antennas and controls the radio, and it just sort of drop down boxes for the 9700, and it works quite nicely. So yeah, a few of the options there. It'll show you the Doppler. It'll show you obviously where the satellite is. It'll show you the coverage, so you can sort of see who you can work depending on sort of which satellite. That one's, I think, a picture of AO92. No, that's not. The next one is AO92. There is some other software packages. There's one for a Mac, I think, called Mac Doppler. And there's a few other quite old legacy Windows-based ones which are still pretty good. There's one called, I think, Nova, which I think some of them seem to charge a lot of money for some reason. I don't know why, but that's, yeah, so I can recommend sort of both of those. There you go. There's even one for a mobile phone. I think, Justin, you've used the mobile phone one when we've sort of played around out here, and it sort of seems to work pretty well.
And G-Predict.
And G-Predict. I like it. It's, yeah, I must get around to trying it again on the 9700, but yeah, Instant Track was very good. That was why we all upgraded to EGA screens so that we could get the map. Which, anyway, enough of how old we are. So once you've sort of decided on a bit of package, on a software package, it's pretty important for a few things. You've got to make sure the Keplerian elements are accurate and up to date. Again, in the old days of playing satellites, you had to download them off a NASA site and key them in to the software, which was really quite arduous. But then along came 2-line AMSAT KEPs where you could just pass them into the software. And now Instant Track, Scott, stop it.
Well, that will import.
G-Predict and SAT PC32 will just instantly go off to the interwebs and grab the latest slot every time you start it up, which is pretty cool. They can be quite complex too, those two software, because not only in the file is the Keplerian elements, but you've also got the beacon frequencies and transponder frequencies and all sorts of stuff. Just got to check the operation parameters of the satellite you want to work, sort of uplink, downlink frequency, any access tones, especially for the FM ones, which are a bit of a gotcha. If you don't send the CTCSS tone, you'll be transmitting madly, swearing and cursing, going, what? Oh, hang on a minute, let me hit the tone button. And with a couple of the satellites, they have different modes. So like have a mode B or a mode J, so different uplinks. So you need to make sure, like with AO92, they've been putting it on Mondays into L-band mode. So it's 1200 megs up and 2 metres down. So it doesn't matter how much you transmit on 70 centimetres, it won't hear you. So if you want to go the full gamut, sort of obviously get the software to interact with your 9700, which is really pretty cool, and then get the software to interact to your antenna controller, and then sort of try and make it all work together. And I think one of the things you mentioned, Rex, about having to set up for digital modes and all these things, the confusion happens when you use different bits of software that want to talk to different addresses of the radio and different baud rates, and you've set it up for one and you'll go, oh, that's right, it doesn't work on this one because I need to change this baud rate to this, and then you change it and then you go to use the other bit of software and you go, why doesn't that work? And yeah, so yellow post-it notes are really good for that. So that's a little bit of a snap out of SAT PC32. So you can put in your grid locator or your longitude, latitude, and elevation, and that's the bit you got to put in every time if you don't pay the money. Until you get the hang of it, until you can really justify, it's probably worth doing that every time. It's not too bad.
How much is the money?
Oh, 50 US, I think.
Oh.
So it was, yeah. I think I did mine in pounds. It worked out easier to do it in pounds. So that's the setup in SAT PC32 to talk to the radio. So just again, sort of drop down box, select IC-9700, whichever COM port you're using. And it sort of just works. The old kludgy thing used to be you had to select an IC-9100 and change the address of your radio from A2 to C7, I think, to make it think it was a 9100. And that's the options to get the SAT PC32 to talk to the antenna tracking, the K3NG, which there are a few of those in service around the joint. I know of at least 2. 3 in fact. One's on my 10 gig system. So yeah, you just select the protocol, which is the ACGS232. Tell it what COM port it's on, and then SAT PC32 fires up this little bit of a thing that runs in the background that runs away and initiates the communication between them. And again, it all sort of works pretty well. You can actually test it up there in the top right-hand little window. You can actually read. You can click on read the position, and it'll tell you what. It'll just go out to the rotator, out to the controller, and grab its position. So, for demonstration purposes, we picked AO92, which is Fox 1D. It's an FM only satellite, so its uplink frequency is either 435 350 or 1267 350, and it downlinks 145 880, and the beacon is on 145 880, and because it's an FM transmission, it basically puts the data underneath the voice. And if you use the little bit of cool software, you can actually decode the telemetry while you're working people, which is pretty cool. And it needs a 67 Hz CTCSS tone to activate. Okay, so a few little things that's all worth mentioning. A lot of people, because we've got a 9700s, we're really lucky, and they do 75 watts out. Please don't fire 75 watts at the satellite if you've got any sort of gain antennas, because its AGC will have a moment, and in fact you'll actually hear less signal. It's, yeah. 10 or 20 watts is a pretty sort of nice number. You'll hear people say they use a handheld and it's 5 watts, but I think you sort of don't want to be too far on the edge, so I think 10 or 20 watts is pretty acceptable. They're full duplex devices, and one of the traps that a lot of people, if you sort of can't hear yourself coming down, chances are either you're not making it in, or something's wrong, and you probably need to check, because it would be sort of a bit rude to be sort of just transmitting and maybe coming out on the downlink frequency, and if you can't hear it, then you're sort of stopping someone else from using it. That's the only little downside to the FM things, is they're just like talking on the repeater, so if one person's using it, then no one else can. The other bit of etiquette is sort of, they're not for rats, sort of for rag chewing, sort of just basically jump on, exchange call signs, and sort of let a few people get in. There's more and more people on. Yeah, headphones. I love using headphones, because obviously, yeah, it'll mess with your head pretty badly, hearing a bit of a delay, and of course you get a bit of feedback, and it can make sort of stuff sound pretty thin and awful with the cancelling of the voices. If you're doing lots of stuff, like I'm really fortunate that I got the computer controlling the radio and the antennas, so you can sort of just sit back with your logbook and just write down contacts. I can feel pretty smug about that now, but I have been there where you're actually running outside, turning the antennas and pulling them up with a rope, and then running in and trying to tune, and then run back outside, and it can be pretty fun. But so yeah, it can get pretty busy changing for Doppler and all that. So, but it is pretty cool once you've actually had your first contact. It's sort of pretty cool. So I don't know whether anyone played much with satellites. Other than look, it did, and look, some of them I think, because they've only got like an omnidirectional antenna, I think some of them flip over and their antenna faces either to the Earth or to space, and I think some of them flip over and point to space when they're over the southern hemisphere. Because some...
I never used to have a quarter wave on 2 metres, and that doubles obviously as an almost 5/8 on 70. So on 70 centimetres your signal's almost going vertical, and on 2 metres you're going out to the horizon.
Yeah, if it's not, as long as it's not an overhead pass,
Yeah,
but
if it wasn't an overhead pass, you're okay.
Yeah.
But
like the satellite antennas I use a thing called Mass Pro Oscar Hunters, which are, geez, Justin, they have to be 30, 20, yeah, older than Hayden. That we bought a heap when we were playing with Oscar 10 and Oscar 13. Graham VK5AGR, I think, facilitated all that back in the days of Molinia orbit satellites, which were really groovy because you could work DX into Europe for hours and hours and hours with like 10 watts. It was pretty damn cool. We should get another one of those, or a geosynchronous one, but I don't think that's likely to happen. So,
Put up your GoFundMe.
eh?
Yeah, put up your GoFundMe.
We can work into AO. You could work into Oscar 100, but I think you'd have to be about 20 k's off the coast of Western Australia. I think the footprint ends about.
Anyone's got a mate in Optus? Chuck it on the back of the next one.
So that's basically what the screen of the 9700 looks like in satellite mode. Obviously transmitting at the bottom, the little red TX indicator comes up to indicate that's the one that you're transmitting on with the tone. A little red dot at the top to say that we're recording it onto the SD card, which is a really cool function of the 9700, I must admit. I've played with it a few times. I've also played with the voice keyer for contest. That'll be right up your alley, I would suspect. For just calling CQ, just press the button. It's groovy.
Saves the voice.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so that's actually the footprint when I worked the guy the other night. So it sort of shows you that sort of who you can work, which is pretty cool. That's a SAT PC32 as well, and that's the tracker with the obligatory piece of black electrical tape over the very stupidly selected ultra bright green LED, which was a fairly silly idea. It was pretty cool at the time, I thought, but it's actually, you nearly have to put it under the desk. It lights up the whole shack. You get GPS lock. So,
Hi, this is amateur radio satellite Fox 1D.
that wasn't me. It gets better, trust me. Really, did I leave that much in? Damn it. So that's people pressing the button to hear if they can get in.
VK4, Mike India Lima, VK7, Zulu, Bravo, X-ray, over. VK4, MIL, VK7, Zulu, Bravo, X-ray, over.
VK7 ZPX, VK4MIL, sorry about that. 19E1 AO92 QSL.
Yeah, Roger, Cole. Good to hear you all as well. Really good signals into Hobart tonight. Running about sort of 10 watts or so to the cross yogies.
Maybe 20.
Over.
7ZPX, VK4MIL. Radio's an IC-910 and I can't get that PC32 to work properly, but anyway, we'll sort it out eventually, so it's all just manual at the moment. But yeah, IC-910 and the 2 Yogies, VK7ZPX, VK4MIL.
2 Yogies, Cole. Good to hear you all as well. Really good signals into Hobart tonight. Running about sort of 10 watts or so to the cross yogies. Over.
Yeah, I see 910 and the
PC32 can be a bit fun to get going. I did try G-Predict but didn't have any luck with that, so anyway. Well, thanks for the content. Great to hear you on this one. Should hear more people on the birds, but yeah, quite a lot of them go by and you don't hear people. Anyway, thanks heaps for the contact. Great to work here. VK4MIL, VK7ZBX, over.
Yeah, VK7ZBX, VK4MIL, 10 watts here also. Just looking at the meter there. And yeah, great to be able to get on the birds coming back from the end of S7 at the moment. So, well, hey, thanks for the contact. Good to hear you. VK7ZBX, VK4MIL, 73's catch you next time, will you?
Yeah, 7-3 all the very best, mate. Talk soon, VK7ZBX.
So, that was pretty strong signals. Apologise that the 9700, a new feature I discovered whilst doing that, was that when you hit record a QSO, it actually breaks up between transmit and receive. So when you transmit it, calls it one file, and then when you receive it, calls it another file, and when you transmit it, creates another file. And I think there's an option in there where you can tell it what to record, whether to record the sub-band or the main band. Hence there was a bit of echo on that. I think it was actually capturing both. But that was pretty reasonable signals. That was at like indicated S9 on the meter, so. This is a little sort of slight adjunct. Played around with AO73 on the previous pass. I'd never ever decoded telemetry on it before, but basically you just tune to the beacon frequency and run this bit of software that again just uses the inbuilt sound card in the 9700, and you can just see it actually tracks the carrier. It's a 1200 baud sort of PSK type beacon, and it just sort of populates in real time the various sort of parameters there, battery voltages and temperatures and things. That's obviously coming down on the same that's in SSB, so that's on a beacon frequency, whereas the transponder, and that's like sort of 50 kilohertz wide in SSBs. But and that's all she wrote. Anyone got any questions about satellite operation? Aha! Very good.
It doesn't have the pretty lights like my A47 has though.
You're a pretty lights man.
Love your GPS, though.
Which has got a green LED.
Yeah, I've got a 12,000 millicandela LED that lights up the shack. That's yeah. Yeah, very good.
All right, so Rex mentioned earlier that because of all the menus that are in this radio and all of the buttons that you can press, it can be quite difficult to figure out how to set it up for digital modes. There's a lot of different ways that you can set it up, and they all work. So what Richard and I did was we went through the menus and just found probably, I suppose, the simplest and easiest way to set it up for WSJT, which everyone seems to use as the preferred software for digital modes. So rather than go through all the settings in this presentation for time, we created a video. So the easiest thing to do is to search for configuring the Icom 9700 for WSJT-X digital modes. And if you can't find that, then add in ham radio DX and you'll find the video, and the video looks like that on the thumbnail. So that will step you through step by step on setting it up for WSJT, and you can pause the video as you go through and set the various menus. So that's setting it up for digital modes that we've been discussing. The next thing is, with these radios, because they are basically a computer inside them, they do have firmware updates for bug fixes and for other improvements and features. So Icom, they release firmware on their website, or Icom Japan release firmware on their website, and you can download the firmware from there and then put that into the radio. So again, rather than showing you the steps on how to do that, you can go to YouTube and search for how to update firmware on the Icom IC-9700, and the video will look like that, and that'll do a step-by-step on loading it, downloading it, putting it on the SD card, and what you have to press on the radio to load the firmware.
So you can't do it through the Ethernet port?
No, you can't. The Ethernet port on this radio is for one purpose only, which is in the next slide. The firmware, the latest firmware I think is 1.24, 1.24, and there is the Icom notes say that it's an improvement to 23 centimeters, the voice quality on 23 centimeters. Yeah, it doesn't tell you what's actually gone wrong that they've had to fix. It just says it improves it. So, but it is good to sort of have the latest firmware running. Oh, did you miss a slide? Oh no, sorry, this is right. So this is remote station operations. So there's two primary pieces of software. I'll talk about the RSBA1 software, and Larry will talk about Win4Icom. So the RSBA1 software is the Icom version of remote software. So it comes from Icom. I think it's about $120 Australian, and that is what the Ethernet port is for on the radio. So the 9700 has a server in the radio, which the software connects to, and the server does all the controls, so changes frequency on the radio, changes power level, and does everything like that. It also controls audio, so audio can be sent from the radio to the computer at the other end, and this can be done on a local LAN, so at home. So you can be in the shack, you can be sitting on your couch with the laptop, and you can be listening to the radio and controlling it, or you can have it, as I've got it, very remote and have it over the internet and control it that way. So the Icom software is intuitive in the fact that the layouts and the buttons all look very familiar, so that they've got the fonts and everything, so it all looks as if you're controlling the radio. You can see there in that screenshot, all these buttons on the left hand side are all, it's a bit blurry, but there's sort of transmit, there's a tuner button for those radios that have a tuner. So this also works with the IC-9700, and I think there's other various radios that it works with as well. Yeah, 9100 as well. Preamp attenuator, that one's RF power. There's volume, squelch. There's a real-time S meter that goes back and forth. Also tells you power, so it's pretty much the screen that's in front of you when you're operating the radio. There are a few things that you can't do with it. You can't go into the menus and bury down and change things in the menus. The software doesn't allow you to do that. So you have to, most of those settings are set and forget. So if it's at the shack at home, it's not a problem. You can just go out and change it whenever you feel like it. But if you go and install it remotely on top of a hilltop or at someone else's house or something, you need to set all those up. I haven't had to go into those menus and change anything. Once I set it, I just left it, so I haven't had to adjust anything there. And Rex said that there's two options in the menus for microphones. There's actually three options in the menus for microphones. There's from the microphone, from the computer, and from the LAN. So the LAN being from the remote software. So when you use it, you have to specify that the audio is coming from your computer when you use it. It's also got a spectrum scope, which is not in that photo, but so you can view the scope and the waterfall as well, so you can view that. Memory channels, you can do those. It's also got the voice keyer. It's got a CW keyer as well. I think it also has a CW decoder in it as well, so you can have that too. But yeah, almost every function that you would need is in this software, and this is the Icom one. So as far as setting it up and using it, you can search for the 9700 with the RSBA1 software remote control into YouTube, and you'll find this video, and you'll see how it works and how to set it up. Yeah. So if you hover your mouse over that, so you can't quite see it. I've put a box in front of it, but that's the tuning dial, and these are all tuning dials, and these ones up here are the notch filters. So you can still use the filters in the radio, and you can adjust them. If you place your mouse cursor over the top of the tuning dial and you use the ball on the mouse, it'll tune it up and down for you. So rather than having to drag it, you can tune it up and down. This is also, all of these buttons here on this screen are all touch. So if you touch that, it will bring that cursor there, and you can set your tuning steps here. So you can tune in 1 Hz steps, and you can.
Provided you got a touch screen when you're in interface.
No. So you can. Well, yeah. If you've got a touch screen display, you can do it. But what I'm saying is you can use your mouse as well to adjust. So you don't need a touch screen there. It would be cool though if you had like a Surface Pro or something and you had the pen and you could adjust it up and down. That'd work. Setting this up can be complicated. That's why I created the video, because it did take a while to figure out how to get it to go. But once it's running, it's just you start up 2 programs. The first program you start up is the audio program, which configures your headset or your microphone, or your headphones and your microphone. You press connect, it connects to the radio, and then you start this software up and it's good to go, and you can just use it, and the audio quality is really good. And this is how I set the 1296 record earlier in the year, remotely. I wasn't near the radio, I was away from the radio, so with a pair of headphones on. So I was able to copy the station's call sign and his report, so the quality is good enough for that.
Hayden, what sort of bandwidth goes between the two when you've got it over a LAN?
So there's different codecs that you can specify. Obviously the lower codecs are lower quality. The bandwidth is, I think it's something similar to I think it's 96k a second or something like that. No, it's not a lot, so it doesn't use a whole lot of data. If anything, the scope, when you run the scope in real time, that's what chews the data up, because that you have to set the radio up at 115,000 on the baud rate, and it maxes that out. So it's at least 100k a second just for the scope. So it's probably about 200k a second when you're running everything, which is still not a lot. I mean, NBN's everywhere, and yeah, it's only if I get limited at the remote end on a 1 meg link or something when it might become a problem. But yeah.
Do you find the package stable? Like the software and the radio, you don't have any issues with it? It just sits there and works?
Yes, it does. I haven't had it crash. The only thing that I've had is if you run, so the way I've got it set up is I've got a local PC that sits next to the radio, connected with USB. If I run WSJT on that and I try to control the radio and change frequencies, it will work, but occasionally there'll be a COM port conflict because they're both using the same COM port at the same time, and WSJT will crash. This software won't crash, WSJT will crash, and you'll have to close WSJT and restart it again for it to work. So the best thing to do is to close down the remote software and then just run WSJT by itself, because you can control the frequency and everything you need to in that. So yeah, the software's stable. And I run on Windows 10. I haven't run it on a Mac, but I believe it runs on a Mac fine. So, any other questions on that? Oh, and Icom release version updates for this as well. Although the last version's like a year and a half old, they haven't added anything to it. So.
Just comment on the bandwidth that I use RSPA1 to control the 7851 remote. And I'm doing that with 4G at the other end. No problem.
Yeah, well, when I set the 1296 meg record, I was using 4G off my phone, hotspotted to that. And even if it does start to break up, you can just go to a lower codec if you want, or turn the scope off, and it won't break up. And like 4G latency is pretty good now. There's not a lot of latency. And it's not just the 9700, as you said, that model radio, but also the 7300, which is the other popular Icom, HF and 6 meters. So you could have a remote HF station in the middle of the bush that's got 4G attached to it, and you'd have quite a nice remote little setup there.
Yeah, the 7600 will work with it, the 7851.
There's a whole pile of radios.
All the more recent Icom radios.
Yeah.
Servers built in.
Yeah. And the good thing with these radios too is because, as Rex said, it's just one USB cable. That's all you plug in. You don't have to have interface boxes and all this stuff. You just have one cable plugged in and it just does it all over USB. The only thing with this, so the difference with this and a 7300, and I think your model radio, is you need a piece, the 7300 needs a PC at the remote end next to the radio as a server, whereas with the 9700 you don't. You just plug your LAN cable in and
7851's the same.
Is it? It's the same.
Built-in server.
Yeah.
7600's got a built-in server.
Yeah.
Don't know the 73.
Yeah, the 7300 doesn't, which is a real pain. It would be good if it did, but yeah. If it's got a built-in server, it means one less PC that you need at the remote end.
Yeah, but it's about a third the price of the 7600.
Yeah.
Something like a tenth of the price
Yeah.
of the 7850.
Yeah, it's still pretty good, yeah. And I mean, you know, you can, if you're clever enough, you can make the PC at the remote end go into standby mode or hibernation while you're not using it, and then wake it up and do all sorts of stuff to save power if you're worried about power. So now I'll move on to Larry.
Well, I was unaware of Icom software, probably because I was doing something rather than paying attention. So I ended up finding a suite of software called, in this case, Win4Icom Suite. And they also, the gentleman who writes this code has a suite for Yaesu and Kenwood. So nearly any radio that has a remote control capability or USB interface can be used with various suites. He doesn't set it up quite like the Icom software, but you can directly touch any band and pretty much set any parameter. And what you don't see here, if you right-click, you then get the menu beneath it. So I think this fellow in his development had the advantage of actually copying a lot of what the Icom software had, plus he's added to it considerably. I have used this with a simultaneous 9700 and a 7300 and running WSJT-X on the 9700. So it's running on a simple little, it's a Intel NUC. It's an i5 computer, and it's like a big ham sandwich. So there's no monitor, of course, and it runs perfectly well. I don't have the experience that Hayden has with it long term. It's relatively new to me, and the gentleman who wrote the code, who writes the code and maintains it rather well, he is available usually within 1 day. So if I email him and say, what do I do here? Or is this a problem? He gets back to me right away. It's a VA2 call sign. Is this just next or?
Yeah, up and down.
Okay. This is a repeat of the beginning one, but oh, I want to go back a second.
Press right, Larry.
Yeah, okay. Notice the radios that this is set up for, plus probably some others. 7100, 73, 7610, etc. And it has the ability of 6 virtual radios can be built that can interface all sorts of stuff. We'll see that later. Again, a closer look at some of the buttons. You can pretty much turn anything on and off at the first and second menu levels on the screen. So for me, I found this actually easier to use than touching. And it gives me more direct, if I want to change the squelch, I don't have to fiddle around with anything. I just zip and it's done. And you can see all the various parameters that can be changed. You can change modes easily. And this is the automatic peaking, the audio peaking filter. So you can change its position and frequency and level and all sorts of stuff. It's quite nice. Okay, just as an overlook of the features, it's got a CW terminal. You've got separate audio monitors. If you want to do club logging and spotting, it's fine. It has all sorts of memories plugged in. And a shortwave database, which I'll show you in a minute. It's very visual in the sense that you can plug in an SDR play and use some IF stuff. So you can have almost an additional receiver picking up any of the IFs out of it. And the 7610 has capabilities that my 7300 or 97 doesn't have. And this will actually work very, very well with it. This is standard Icom spectrum scope, and this is SDR play connected in. And I don't have the tools or the expertise to connect it, but it's really quite nice. I think that's a 7610 on top, and this is an SDR play, just showing you some of the options you can have. You can set the screen sizes and set a whole lot of parameters. This is a 7610, I believe, and is looking at a rather wide spectrum. The software actually will deliver everything that the 7610 can have in terms of bandwidth on the band that you're looking at. Third-party support is extensive. This is running both the spectrum, waterfall, etc. This is the screen, and that I believe is FT8 running on 20 meters. And this is the kind of stuff you can hook in. I found it easy to use. Single USB cable from the radio to I have a little hub, and I do that on both radios, and pretty much it does everything that you might expect. I don't have the skill set that Hayden or Richard have as far as computing is concerned, so this works really well for me. And I can usually find the solution to a problem if I go into the groups. There's a groups.io that people really love this stuff. Again, you can do all sorts of things with the CIV commands. It integrates easily with Ham Radio Deluxe, DX Lab, and then contesting stuff is quite nice. And these are some of the other things, FL Digi, and it's intended as a platform that will talk to pretty much any of the ham radio software that's out there if there's a way to interface it into the system. And the guy is very keen on making changes. It's got all the D-Star stuff built into it, so you can, and it works remotely as well. I have experience with it, not a whole lot, but as I get more and more time free from other activities, I'm getting involved in it. Really, it's very nice software to use, easy. And I like the visual presentations. It has access to this EIBI and other shortwave databases. So if you want to use your 7300 for shortwave listening, it will tell you what frequency and where things are, and you simply touch and it will automatically tune it in. These databases are updated out of a German fellow who likes shortwave listening. So you can go to the band you want, touch it, and it'll show you what's available and all sorts of stuff. I wanted to mention, by the way, that in the 7300 and the 9700, there's different filters that are preset. Usually, for example, on sideband, there are 3 different filters, as in CW, and you can simply go in and customize the filter. So if I select filter 2 and tweak it the way I want it, it'll stay that way, or I can open it all the way up. So these two radios have the ability to customize nearly anything, which is why you have a lot of menu options. But I think, as Hayden very rightfully pointed out, a whole lot of it is set and forget. Like I set the baud rate and I just don't fiddle with it, that sort of thing. Also, with this system, with this software, there you are, club log spots. It's interactive with anything on the web that's interactive. You can go in and just set a whole lot of parameters. I have no experience with remote control. I'd like to see Hayden fiddle with one and see what it does. This is remote control when your radio is equipped to do it, such as the 7610, or you set up a separate operation that will handle it through a USB. This is a review of the software out of eHam, and it's got a 4.6, and this is a comparison to some of the other software that's out there, including the Icom, but I'm convinced that the Icom has some features that this doesn't have, or you can go in and, if you know what you're doing, you can tinker with the Icom stuff that I don't think you can do with this. But I don't know that I'm ever going to know those parameters. So what's interesting, you can run any of the SDR play with its own software simultaneously with this radio, and you can listen on separate bands and touch, and it will automatically tune to this interactive stuff, so you can just touch and go. He runs Swisslog, Bandmaster, and I don't do any of that stuff, but it will work well. This is the RSBA1, which I think is lower rated than it ought to be. But see this IP address information and also the COM ports? This software has a whole set of tools built in that means I don't get in trouble. So it simply says set up your COM ports. So if you want to set it up for the 9700, I set the COM ports up starting with 20, 21, 22, 23. And for the 9700, I'll use 30, 31, 32. So I don't have that Windows issue of where did my COM port go? Or what's my COM port talking to now kind of problem. So you can set them up and forget them. And then when I just turn the computer on, it's ready to rock. And that's it. I didn't mean it to be so short, but we've been here a while. So, yep. I like it. It's $60 American, and you can get a trial and run it for a month if you like it. You can pay for it. And yeah, that's it. It's very nice when you have multiple screens. I run one radio on one screen and another radio on the other screen. But if you have a 7610, you can run separate monitors, and you have all the features for the two receivers available. Not bad for $60 American. Any questions? Pardon? Excuse me?
Making his 847 look really old.
Yes. Right. Well, looking at some of the features and the depths of the menus and things, I don't want to. Rex is absolutely right, and so is Hayden. I found that if I do what Rex has done, it works for me, and that is I figure out what I need to find when I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing, and then I go in and look it up. I decided it's not possible for me to learn the whole radio. I'm doing CW. How do I do CW?
And I think in the back of the manual as well, there is some sort of cheat menus that tell you how to get things quickly for common stuff as well, like a bit of a flow chart. I think it's in the detailed manual, but yeah, it does help.
Well, what was nice about this is, you see it's got RF gain and squelch and all these other things. There are also menu sets below this if you want it. It put much more of what's available in the radio on a screen in front of me rather than looking at the little small thing and trying to remember. Because one of the issues for me is if I push M memory or M display or whatever, what does that get me? And then wait a minute, why am I looking? That's not what I want. And then I turn off one of the bands on the 9700 and then I actually can see what I want. And Rex and I went through this other thing. He says, that doesn't look like my screen. And so we walked through who's pushing what buttons, and then he ended up with a really large version of what the SWR graph was. So it's all there, and it's extraordinary hardware. And I hate to say it, but when I was getting into radio, I would have given precious body parts for a Collins. These radios eat Collins' lunch. It's just done. I mean, it's all over. There are some issues with front ends and things like that. So this isn't, military hardened, I don't think, any of these ICOMs, but it's affordable.
And what this does is present you with a standardized interface.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't matter what the radio is behind it. It's standard. So you get used to this, and that's it.
And it seems to be that's what Icom's trying to do with their 7300, 9700 and 705 is when you operate the proper radio, it's the same layout, same buttons, same area. You configure it on one, you can configure it on the other. So it's like they've actually figured out, if we keep the interfaces all the same, people will start to buy the next model and the next model.
Yeah. I just wish that the 9700 had 6 meters on it. That's the only. Yes, please. Yeah.
Does the 7300 have 6 meters?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And the 705 has everything.
Yeah, 705 has everything.
23 centimetres.
We've just got to get it.
It's not far away.
Yeah. And all of those, I'm sure this software will support it, as I'm sure your ICOM software will, the 705. And this runs very well on small computers. It's really minimal footprint and minimal RAM and all that sort of thing.
I believe the 705 is going to ship the end of this month.
To us?
Yeah. Okay. From Japan. Japan are working. They're doing some firmware changes, and then I think it's almost ready.
I spoke to a ham club member who has a 7610 and has tried to get his hands on a 9700, which apparently is back ordered somewhere. We're not sure when they're coming in on the 9700.
What's on special on Strictly Ham I saw this today?
Then they may have just come up.
That's the that's why I updated the cost.
Yeah.
So
I'll have to tell them to call him again.
So and I went there looking for the 705 because Ross said, "Look, keep your eye on the website." So yeah. Anyway.
They must have just come in, or they're coming in quickly. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions for any of our presenters?
I have a question about the frequency stability of the 9700, an age-old subject apparently. I have a 10 meg reference GPS locked, and I feed it into the back, and I poke the Icom automatic recalibration tool, whatever. Whenever I talk to you on either 1296 or I look at the various beacons and stuff on 2 meters and everything, it seems really, really quite accurate. Do you have any more current information on what the frequency stability is, for example, on 2 or 1296?
Where's the current firmware?
Yeah, with you having a series of GPS devices.
It will be really accurate until you transmit.
Yeah, I did a video on it as well on my channel of the firmware where they fixed it.
Right.
And what happens is it's good for the first 15 seconds of your transmission. If you don't transmit, it's fine. It's on frequency.
Yeah.
But then if you transmit after about 15 seconds, it starts to drift in one direction. And then what happens is the software tries to compensate. So you'll get if you're looking on Whisper, you'll get a line, and then the line will move back into on frequency again. But then when you finish transmitting, it'll just repeat over the next time, because the software takes time for it to recalibrate what the fan's doing. So they sort of fixed it, but not quite.
Well, that was
a couple of qualifications. If you're only using no power because you're driving a linear, say, the fan never comes on. So it's pretty good. The other thing, if you go onto the IC9700 groups.io, you'll hear lots of people say, "Oh, I can decode stations on JT65 on 1296 and it's worked fine." What they forget is it's drifting off during the decode period. So sure, if the signal's strong, it'll decode, but you're not getting the full sensitivity because it's drifted from one bin to the next bin. And it tends to drift sort of inverse exponentially, so it might stay sufficiently stable to decode in the last 2/3 of a period, but you're losing the first third of the period.
Well, you mentioned putting a resistor in so that the fan runs much of the time, and then when the transmitter says we need it full on, then it goes through a diode or something. I've forgotten what it was.
I haven't done it myself.
Yeah.
But that's a mod that some people have put in, so that because the fan is running all the time, it doesn't have to correct so far, and that keeps the thing probably good enough for most. But you know, I guess I work on the principle I want it to be spot on.
But if you're using it for FM or D-Star or voice, it doesn't matter.
No.
It's perfectly fine with the latest firmware.
Well, I was wondering about the 1296 from here to Launceston, that sort of stuff. That's what I actually had. Well,
I would say unless you're properly GPS locked, you're losing something.
Okay.
Just a point from a non-owner. What's to stop you running the fan from an external supply, just to overcome the strain?
You can do that.
People have done
yeah, yeah, people do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make things more stable?
Oh, certainly, yes.
Yeah.
It's just the question of how long the fan's going to last. If you run the radio all the time, the fan might fail, and then you have to replace the fan.
But if you've got a switching signal there, you can make it trigger so that when it comes in from an external supply rather than drawing from the radio.
Thanks everyone.
Steve, well, I think there are several different ways of doing it. I believe that if you can, you should do it as good as the state of the art allows, which is why I'm in line for one of Rex's magic frequency fixers.
VK1XXs. I'm merely the VK7 supplier.
Ignore the retailer, he's the wholesaler.
Yes. You had your hand up. Oh, okay.
So can somebody just enlighten me, please? Is the problem that where the oscillator is situated, it's downstream of where the heat's being generated?
No.
The real problem is that in order to reduce the phase noise, they've got a big copper plate
Yep.
on the printed circuit board,
Right, okay.
and that conducts the cooling effect of the fan once it comes
right, okay.
on.
Yep.
And despite the fact that they've actually got the oscillator in a little foam box, this copper is
It's being chilled from underneath.
is
So
driving
it's the
the
airflow.
thing off.
When the air flows over the oscillator, that's when it moves.
So the best thing
Well,
you
it's
can do is
really caused by the air flowing over the copper,
Yeah.
which conducts into the oscillator.
Could you put an insulator between the oscillator and the copper?
No, because then you lose all the phase noise advantage of this copper, which is it keeps all the.
Yeah.
And you can't get in to do that. You'd have to get in there to modify it, and it's not really worth it.
It makes the famous Icom banana frequency.
Once Glenn actually gets his boards out, that they solve it.
Because they are dead easy to put in. Like as far as molding radios, those VK1XX boards are dead easy to put in.
Yeah.
And because the oscillator's a TCXO, it's not like a double oven or anything like that. As soon as there's any temperature change, it just goes off.
So if you had TCXO in there, sitting above it would be okay because it'd be self-contained and thermally insulated and maintaining its temperature. So it's sort of a combination of two things. Yeah.
It's a 49 megahertz, 49.1 with 5 megahertz oscillator. We just Herman VK7HW has actually been watching on the stream, so he just said great presentation, so thanks to all those involved. I'll just put out a call on R2 and 3807. This is VK7OTC, just putting out a call for anybody who has been watching the RF stream or the YouTube stream who has any questions over.
VK7 Victor Hotel, and no questions, just want to thank all the presenters on an excellent presentation. Thank you very much indeed. Over.
Yeah, VK7VH, VK7OTC. Thanks, Vince. Thanks very much. They all heard that. Cheers. So can we show our appreciation of everybody who put in for the presentation, please?